Book 2, Chapter 8. The Lighthouse's Call. A week passed in relative quiet before Sildar summoned Morthal again, his weathered face grim beneath the lantern light of the town hall.
"Troubling news from Neverwinter,"
he stated without preamble.
"There's a lighthouse on the coast. Used to be a cultist site. Cleared by the Order of the Gauntlet years ago.
His fingers traced the coastline on a map spread between them.
Now, it's active again. Reports say it's luring ships onto the rocks."
He looked up, his eyes heavy with unspoken concern.
"We need your capable men to investigate."
Morthal felt a familiar weight settle across his shoulders, a burden he had carried since Baldur's Gate. His fingers instinctively reached for the symbol of Helm hanging at his chest, thumb tracing the worn edges. The mention of cultists stirred memories of those failures.
"The Order of the Gauntlet couldn't maintain their victory,"
he observed, a hint of judgment in his voice despite his effort to remain neutral. Morthal studied the map with narrowed eyes, mentally calculating travel times and potential dangers. This was exactly the kind of righteous mission he needed: clear evil, innocent lives at stake. Perhaps here Helm would grant him the true absolution of his mistake.
"We'll leave at first light,"
he said finally, already composing the speech he would deliver to his companions. At the inn, Morthal gathered the others. As they assembled in the main room, with its comforting smells of ale and wood smoke, Trilena, the innkeeper's wife, pulled Morthal aside. Her voice was hushed, but firm as her work-roughened fingers gripped his sleeve.
"Morthal, about the elf, Ilara."
She glanced nervously toward the stairs.
"He smells. He doesn't bathe. He's frightening the children with his mumbling, and that charred thing he carries."
She swallowed hard.
"I'll have to ask him to leave soon if something isn't done."
Morthal nodded wearily, feeling the invisible weight upon his shoulders grow heavier. Another burden, another soul in his care needing attention.
"I'll speak with him,"
he promised. As he relayed the mission details to the group, the mysterious lighthouse, the missing ships, the potential danger, all agreed, and when they dispersed to prepare, Morthal took Ilara aside, steering him to a quiet corner.
"Ilara,"
he said gently but firmly.
"Trilena is concerned. You need to bathe before we leave."
Ilara stared at him, eyes vacant and unblinking.
"No more blood,"
he whispered, more to himself than to Morthal.
"Blood doesn't cleanse it."
Then, without another word, he returned to his room. Moments later, his battered leather armor sailed out the window, landing with a dull thud in the street below. His voice followed, raw and strained.
"The warrior's days are over."
Hours passed before Ilara emerged, scrubbed clean in the inn's backyard trough, clad in a simple gray peasant's shirt, his wet hair plastered to his skull. Gone was the lethal grace that had once defined him. In its place, something more fragile, more broken.
"Going into battle without your skin, warrior?"
Doreen quipped, unable to resist as she leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over her chest and a smile playing at her lips.
"I told you,"
Ilara replied, his voice flat, devoid of its usual quiet cadence.
"Those days are done."
Morthal stepped in, clapping a hand on Ilara's shoulder, perhaps trying to convince himself as much as the others.
"This mission is important. A chance, perhaps, to help our brother Ilara find his way back to the path."
His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken doubt. No one challenged them, but no one believed them either. They set out the next morning, the wagon creaking beneath their supplies. The familiar rhythm of travel settled over them, Balin's steady presence at the reins, Doreen scouting ahead, Zira deep in thought, and Ilara adrift, clutching the charred doll's head, occasionally whispering to it when he thought no one was listening. The coastal road unwound before them like a fraying ribbon mixed with earthy scent of horses and leather. As dusk approached, the first stars punctured the darkening canvas above, and they made camp in the lee of a stone outcropping that shielded them from the restless wind. During an early watch, Zira found Elara sitting apart, staring into the fire. His fingers worked methodically at a piece of string, knotting and unknotting it in what seemed like a ritual without purpose.
You seemed lonely back at the inn.
Zira ventured softly, settling beside him. The heat of the fire warmed her face, but a deeper chill lingered in her bones, a premonition she couldn't name.
Perhaps we could share meals when we have the chance.
Elara looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes.
That would be nice.
He murmured.
It's been so long since we ate together. With Mom and Dad?
A chill traced Zira's spine that had nothing to do with the night air. Mom and Dad? She swallowed, the realization dawning cold and sharp. Elara wasn't just haunted. He was lost, mistaking her for someone else entirely. His dead sister, perhaps. The name Eli had slipped from his lips during moments of distress before. Zira's first instinct was to correct him, to say firmly, "I'm not Eli." The words rose to her lips, then faltered. His eyes held such fragile hope, such desperate belief. To shatter it seemed cruel. Yet to feed his delusion, was that not equally cruel in a different way? She found herself caught in the undertow of someone else's madness, unsure which way led to shore. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve as she held her tongue, but decided to ask gently.
What do you remember about Mom and Dad?
Elara flinched as if struck, a tremor running through his slender frame. The string in his hands pulled taut, his knuckles whitening. He turned wide, haunted eyes towards her.
We agreed not to talk about them, Eli.
He whispered urgently, his voice suddenly childlike in its fear.
But I promise you, this time you won't die. I won't let them hurt you. I'll do anything to keep you safe.
Eli? The confirmation landed like a physical blow. Zira felt a wave of pity mixed with a rising sense of dread. Elara was reliving a past trauma, casting Zira in the role of the sister he'd failed to protect. The weight of his trust, misplaced as it was, settled on her shoulders like a mantle both precious and suffocating. What was the kind response here? To play along might deepen his delusion, yet to reject it might break something fragile within him. The irony wasn't lost on her. She, who had spent her life seeking validation through any means, now hesitated to provide it, even as a mercy. The following day, they passed the very spot where, weeks ago, their journey had truly begun. The site of the goblin ambush, the place they'd found, the rock seekers' slain horses. They paused, the memory a somber shadow stretching across the path. Morthal walked to the exact place where the first goblin had fallen to his warhammer. He knelt, running his fingers through the earth, now washed clean by rain and time.
Life moves in circles,
he said, his voice carrying to them all.
We begin, we journey, we return. Sometimes
he looked up at the darkening sky.
Sometimes the journey takes us to places we never imagined. Few weeks ago, I started this journey by the sea in Neverwinter, and now I hear the call of the sea again.
His hand moved to the symbol of Helm hanging at his chest, fingers tracing the familiar contours of the vigilant eye.
At Wyvern Tor, I felt Helm's presence again, after years of doubt. I understood something I had forgotten. A shield weathers. It cracks, as it takes blows meant for others.
Morthal paused, his expression distant, as if listening to words only he could hear. There was something more to those words, some conclusion that danced just beyond his grasp. The whole verse hovered on the edges of his mind like a half-remembered dream, important yet impossible to grasp. A strange silence followed his words. Even Doreen, usually quick with a sarcastic retort, remained quiet. Her eyes narrowed. Morthal stood, brushing the dirt from his hands, seemingly unaware of the weight his words had cast over the group.
We should make camp.
He said more practically.
Tomorrow, we reach the coast.
That night, Doreen heard whispering drift from the edge of the camp. Curiosity piqued. She crept closer, melting into the shadows with practiced ease. It was Elara speaking softly in Elvish, his voice shifting, alternating, a conversation with himself. Two distinct tones weaving a strange, unsettling dialogue with the charred doll's head cradled in his palms. She'd seen much in her life, death, betrayal, the worst of what people could do to one another. But this slowly unraveling mind was somehow even more disturbing. In the grey light of morning, Doreen informed Morthal, watching his face carefully as she told him what she'd witnessed. The cleric's brow furrowed, and he nodded grimly.
I suspected as much,
he murmured. He approached Elara as they broke camp, his expression troubled.
Elara,
he began, clearing his throat.
People are concerned about the doll's head you carry. You speak to it?
Elara simply held out the blackened, warped head.
She speaks to me,
he corrected quietly. But in Morthal's presence, the doll remained stubbornly silent. Morthal retreated, baffled and uneasy. He pulled Zira aside later as they walked a few paces behind the wagon.
What do we do?
He asked, the burden heavy in his voice.
Elara needs help.
You brought him from Neverwinter, Morthal,
Zira countered, a touch sharply, pushing the responsibility back.
He is your charge.
She felt a pang of guilt, but also exhaustion. She couldn't fix Elara, not when she was struggling to hold herself together, with scales hidden beneath her clothing and nightmares of multi-headed dragons plaguing her sleep. But even as the words left her mouth, Zira felt the web of complicated emotions tangling inside her. Just yesterday, Elara had looked at her with such trust, such broken hope, seeing his sister where she stood. The weight of that mistaken identity pressed on her conscience. She was no healer, no savior. She was barely holding her own deceptions in check. And yet, wasn't there something familiar in Elara's fractured state? They were both hiding, both constructing realities they could bear to live in. Hers was deliberate, his tragic, but the difference felt smaller with each passing day.
He sees me as his sister,
she admitted quietly to Morthal, her voice barely audible over the crunch of their boots on the path.
His dead sister. I don't know how to help someone who doesn't even see me for who I am.
The irony of those words wasn't lost on her, she who had spent her life ensuring no one saw who she was.
Help isn't available out here,
Morthal sighed, running a hand over his face.
We press on. To the lighthouse. But I promise that I will find help for him when we get back.
Zira considered his words, her anger softening at the genuine concern in his eyes. Perhaps she judged too harshly. Morthal carried his own burdens, his own sense of responsibility.
And I promise that I will carry my part of that,
she conceded, glancing ahead to where Elara walked, having what appeared to be a silent conversation with the air beside him.
This is a problem that concerns us all.
They journeyed westward, crossing the high road, heading towards the coast. The sky grew overcast, a bruised palette of grays and purples stretching from horizon to horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the salty tang of the sea, along with hints of seaweed and distant rain. As they crested a rocky rise, the ocean finally revealed itself, a vast slate-gray expanse stretching endlessly to the west, white caps racing across its surface like fleeing spirits. Waves crashed against the jagged shoreline below, sending plumes of spray high into the air.
Ah, the fresh sea air,
Morthal declared, trying to inject some cheer into the group's somber mood. Ilara, surprisingly, nodded, a faint echo of his former self surfacing. The purpose of the journey, the routine of travel, seemed to ground him, pulling him back from the brink. He spoke less to the doll's head, his focus turned outward. That evening, they made camp on a windswept moor overlooking the turbulent sea. Gnarled, salt-stunted trees bent permanently inland from years of coastal gales. The heather and scrub grass rippled like water under the relentless wind. Ilara worked alongside the others, helping dig a pit to shield the campfire, his movements efficient, almost calm. The firelight caught the angles of his face, softening the haunted hollows beneath his cheekbones, returning something of his elvish grace to his features. His hands, once so deadly with bow and blade, now moved purposefully among the stones, arranging them with unexpected care. The night deepened, bringing with it a fine, stinging mist, not quite rain, but more than mere fog, that clung to their skin and clothing, making everything damp and heavy. The crash of waves below grew louder as the tide rose. During his watch with Zyra, Ilara spoke more freely than he had in weeks, though his words were unsettling.
I'll stay close to you now, Eli.
He promised, his eyes fixed on Zyra.
Always close.
His fingers worked absently at the hem of his sleeve, a nervous habit that seemed to have replaced his once fluid movements. Zyra watched him from the corner of her eye, the firelight reflecting off her face, highlighting one side in amber warmth while leaving the other in shadow. The duality seemed fitting for how she felt, torn between compassion for this broken creature and fear of the depths of his delusion. The wind tugged at her hair, sending strands across her face, and she tucked them back with a practiced motion, wondering what lay behind those eyes that saw a ghost where she stood. The next day they reached their destination. The lighthouse stood stark and solitary on a rocky promontory, lashed by wind and spray. A storm raged over the sea, churning the waves into white-capped fury. From the tower's peak, a baleful green light pulsed rhythmically, accompanied by a deep, thudding sound, like a monstrous heartbeat. As they cautiously approached the base of the cliff path, a colossal shape emerged from the churning surf. A giant crab, barnacle-encrusted and ancient, waved its massive pincers frantically, its shell the size of a small wagon.
"Help! Thieves! Help!"
A strange, gurgling voice echoed across the wind, emanating not from any visible mouth, but seeming to bubble up from somewhere beneath the creature's dripping carapace.
"Mistress! Angry! Shell stolen!"
The crab skittered sideways across the foaming shallows, its multiple eyes swiveling independently to focus on each member of the party. One enormous pincer rose, pointing accusingly at the lighthouse.
They took sacred shell, balance broken."
Morthal stepped forward, raising his voice against the howling wind.
Who are you? What shell do you speak of? We've come to investigate.
But the creature cut him off with a frantic clacking of its secondary mandibles.
No time, all lost."
It scuttled backward as a particularly large wave crashed against the shore, sending spray high into the air.
"Find shell, restore."
Before Morthal could even formulate another question, the creature plunged back beneath the waves, vanishing into the foam, leaving behind only the faintest trace of that eerie green luminescence swirling in the retreating tide.
What in the nine hells was that?
Doreen muttered, her hand instinctively knocking an arrow, though the target was long gone.
Some manner of giant crab,
Morthal replied, squinting after the vanished creature.
but one that speaks.
More importantly,
Zyra interjected.
it said something about a shell being stolen and a mistress.
The lighthouse keeper, perhaps?
Balin suggested, his gruff voice practical as always. Doreen, ever the scout, decided to take the lead.
I'll go first.
She announced.
Keep your weapons ready. I don't like the look of that green light.
The lighthouse was perched on a cape, where only a narrow stone way, resembling a bridge, led to its base. The path corkscrewed along the lighthouse hill, climbing almost 100 feet before reaching the keep's walls. At the beginning of the path was a small cave tunnel, ocean spray misting its entrance. Doreen took point entering the tunnel while the others remained at its mouth, watching vigilantly. Inside, she found a clear path forward, but also noticed a side room adorned with intricate patterns of shells arranged in mesmerizing, almost hypnotic whirls. Intrigued, she peered inside. A spectral form materialized before her, a banshee.
Thieves!
It shrieked, the sound piercing Doreen's skull like an ice-cold needle. Panic overriding thought, Doreen fired an arrow, the missile passing harmlessly through the apparition. She turned and fled, scrambling back toward the tunnel entrance. Hearing the shriek, Morthal and Balin rushed forward to meet her. As they converged at the tunnel mouth, the banshee unleashed another cry, a soul-tearing wail of despair that vibrated in their bones. Balin gasped, clutching his chest, and collapsed to the ground. Ilara, just behind them, also crumpled, overwhelmed by the psychic anguish. Zyra and Morthal staggered back, hands clamped over their ears, feeling warm blood trickling from beneath their fingers. Morthal recovered first, channeling Helm's energy to lay a healing hand on Balin's chest. Zyra, still disoriented, fumbled for a healing potion and pressed it into Ilara's trembling hand. Seeing the banshee approaching, Doreen bolted up the winding path toward the lighthouse, with Morthal following close behind after ensuring Balin was stable. Zyra dragged Ilara back toward the beach, supporting his weight as the wounded dwarf was trying to get up near the cave entrance. At the lighthouse courtyard, Doreen glanced up to see 3 harpies perched atop the crumbling curtain wall. They spread their enormous feathered wings and began to sing, their voices weaving an enchanting melody that promised ecstasy and oblivion. Morthal, just reaching the hill's base, stopped in his tracks, his face slackening as the song ensnared his mind. Doreen, recognizing the danger, quickly stuffed her fingers in her ears to mute the deadly enchantment. She looked back down the path to see the banshee had emerged from its grotto and now hovered over Balin, who had fallen behind. The spirit's spectral hands tightened around the dwarf's throat, while Zyra and Ilara were retreating further down toward the beach. Making a split-second decision, Doreen turned and ran back toward the banshee, skidding to a halt before the enraged spirit.
Forgive me!
She cried, holding up her hands, one clutching the grisly goblin hand she carried as a macabre charm.
A misunderstanding. We meant no harm. We will help you get back your stolen shell.
Her voice cracked with desperation, her wide blue eyes pleading. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity, or the sight of the goblin hand, or some flicker of forgotten reason in the banshee's cold heart. But the spirit hesitated. It tilted its head and stared at Doreen, who remained kneeling, petrified. Its grip on Balin loosened. With a final baleful glare, it dissipated, flowing back into the shell-adorned grotto. Down on the beach, Zyra helped a shaken Ilara to his feet. They scanned the cliff path above. Morthal, Doreen, Balin, all gone from sight. Dread coiled in Zyra's gut, cold and heavy.
They need us,
she said, her voice tight. She turned back towards the path. Ilara immediately moved ahead of her, positioning himself between her and whatever dangers awaited them. As they climbed, the wind whipped salt spray across their faces, carrying fragments of an otherworldly melody, a sweet promise partially drowned by the sea's rumbling, distant enough that they could resist its haunting pull on their minds. Up ahead, they spotted Doreen kneeling beside Balin's prone form halfway up the narrow, winding path. She poured a healing potion between the dwarf's lips with one hand, while her eyes remained fixed on something further up the cliff face. Following her gaze, Zira saw Morthal standing precariously close to the edge, his sword hanging limply from his hand. 3 harpies circled above him, their naked torsos and feathered wings silhouetted against the stormy sky, their song penetrating the howling wind. Balin's eyes fluttered open as the healing magic coursed through him. He reached for his throat, still feeling the ghostly chill of the banshee's touch. When he looked up, Doreen was already sprinting away toward Morthal. Just as Balin prepared to follow, hauling himself to his feet, he heard it. Not the wind or waves, but music. Singing, impossibly beautiful, weaving through the storm like threads of spun moonlight. It silenced the pain, quieted the anger. Angels, surely. He saw them now wheeling against the bruised sky, creatures of sublime grace. His grimace softened, awe replacing fury.
By Moradin's anvil, grandmother was right,
he muttered, a crooked smile forming beneath his matted beard. He had to get closer, just to touch them. Oblivious, Balin took slow, shuffling steps forward, axe forgotten. For Morthal, the world had dissolved into pure, rapturous sound, peace, solace, an end to doubt, all promised by the celestial choir. The creatures above beckoned, their arms an embrace. He lifted his arms, ready to touch them, ready to step into bliss. Doreen raced up the path, fumbling in her pouch. Without breaking stride, she scattered caltrops across the stone just in front of Morthal's feet.
Morthal!
She shouted.
Watch the edge!
But the cleric didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the circling harpies, arms outstretched as if in welcome. Agony, sharp and profane, lanced through Morthal's foot. The caltrop bit deep, shattering the enchantment. The angelic choir became a predatory shriek. The beckoning arms became razor talons. The promise of peace became the terrifying reality of a sheer drop into the churning sea below. Cold terror gripped him. He wasn't embracing angels. He was about to die. He looked up, eyes wide with dawning horror, just as the harpies, seeing their prey awaken, adjusted their flight. All 3 screeched, tucking their wings for a synchronized dive, talons aiming straight for him. Morthal reacted instinctively, calling upon Helm's power.
Guardian of Gates, lend me your might,
he bellowed, raising his holy symbol. A spiritual warhammer materialized beside him, glowing with golden light. With a swift gesture, he sent it crashing into the first harpy, catching it squarely in the chest. The creature's dive became an ungraceful tumble as it veered off course, screeching in pain and outrage. A fire surged through Zyra's veins, ancient and demanding, the urge to unleash, to burn. The memory of Butterskull Ranch, the satisfying screams of incinerated orcs, intoxicating and terrifying. Then she suddenly realized fire, raw and incandescent, was already erupting from her hands, licking at her fingers, demanding release.
It's happening again,
she gasped, staring at her own burning hands with terror and awe. She had to release the flames. Fire erupted from her fingertips. The flames coalesced into a searing bolt that streaked through the air toward the second diving harpy. It struck the creature's wing, setting feathers ablaze and forcing it to veer sharply away from Morthal as it struggled to extinguish itself.
Eli, no!
Ilara cried, his voice tight with familiar panic.
Stay back!
He moved instinctively, trying to shield her. But the third harpy, untouched and undeterred, pressed its attack. It swooped low, talons like razors extended, and slammed into Morthal. The claws dug deep into his shoulders and chest, the sheer momentum of the impact staggering him. Before he could react, before anyone could intervene, the harpy's powerful downbeat carried them both backward, over the crumbling edge of the cliff path. For a single suspended heartbeat they hung there, cleric and monster silhouetted against the raging sea. Then, with a final, triumphant shriek, the harpy released its grip, letting Morthal fall.
Morthal! No!
Zyra screamed, the sound swallowed by the wind. When Morthal fall to the hell's cauldron of stormy sea, time stretched, thinning like spun glass. The roar of the wind became a whisper. Peace, deep and resonant, settled over Morthal. He felt no regret, only a quiet sense of completion. He sent a silent thanks to Helm, not for salvation, but for acceptance. His purpose, he understood with sudden blinding clarity, had never been to lead them to the end, but merely to gather them, to bring them to this point. Someone else would have to guide them now. His role was fulfilled. He remembered the words he'd tried to share at the goblin site, words that had felt clumsy then but rang with truth now.
A shield is not meant to last forever. It weathers, it cracks, as it takes blows meant for others, until it has served its purpose.
This was the highest honor for a follower of the Vigilant One, to stand between harm and the vulnerable, to be the sacrifice. Zyra, grief and rage twisting inside her like twin serpents, unleashed her power. The world around her seemed to blur at the edges, Morthal's fall replaying endlessly behind her eyes, even as her hands moved of their own accord. A pulsing orb of energy split in two as it left her trembling fingers, hurtling toward the harpy trio that now turned their attention to the remaining prey on the narrow cliffside path. One orb struck true, searing through feather and flesh, sending the first harpy plummeting into the same churning waters that had swallowed Morthal moments before. The second orb went wide as Zira's vision blurred with unshed tears, the harpy banking sharply to avoid it. The two remaining harpies circled once, their shrieks now predatory rather than seductive, and dove in tandem. One swept toward Doreen, the other toward Ilara, who had positioned himself directly in front of Zira.
Eli, run!
Ilara shouted, his voice distant and strange to Zira's ears. He raised his sword to meet the first attack.
I'll hold them off!
The look in his eyes was wild, desperate, a man reliving his worst nightmare. In this moment he wasn't on a lighthouse cliff. He was somewhere else, some time else, trying to save a sister who had died long ago. The first harpy raked its talons across Ilara's shoulder as he pivoted, drawing a line of crimson. He grunted, but kept his footing on the treacherous path, slashing upward as the creature passed. His blade caught only air as the harpy wheeled around for another pass. Simultaneously, the second harpy dove at Doreen, catching her across the back as she tried to retreat toward the tunnel. Blood bloomed across her tunic, and she cried out in pain, stumbling forward.
That's not our mother. It has those teeth.
Ilara shouted, his words making no sense to anyone but himself as he parried another diving attack. The wounded Doreen managed to draw her bow, despite her injury, but her first shot went wide as a harpy swooped mere inches above her head, forcing her to duck. The narrow path offered little room to maneuver, the sheer drop to the sea on one side, the cliff face on the other. Ilara dodged another attack, but the second harpy caught him across the forearm with its talons, drawing blood. He spun and slashed, his blade connecting this time, opening a shallow wound across the creature's leg, not enough to ground it, but enough to enrage it further. Zira summoned another wave of magic, the fire inside her roaring for release. The draconic power surged through her veins, intoxicating in its intensity, terrifying in its familiarity. She barely recognized her own hands as they glowed with amber light. Her twin orbs of fire streaked outward, one catching a harpy square in the chest as it banked for another attack on Elara. The creature erupted in flames, its shriek cutting off abruptly as it plunged into the sea below. Elara, breathing hard from exertion, saw the remaining harpy bank sharply in the sky above, its eyes fixed not on him but on Zira, who stood exposed on the path, her attention still on the harpy she had just vanquished. The creature tucked its wings and plummeted directly toward her, talons extended.
Not Eli. Not again.
The thought flashed through Elara's mind, primitive and desperate. In 2 strides he reached Zira, his hands connecting with her shoulders, shoving her hard toward the tunnel entrance just as the harpy reached their position. Zira flew backward into the tunnel, landing hard on the stone floor. Confusion washed over her. What had happened? She hadn't seen the attack coming. The harpy's talons raked across Elara's back instead of finding Zira's flesh, tearing through his shirt and drawing parallel lines of blood.
Stay back,
he screamed, spinning to face the harpy, parrying its next attack with his blade, his movements precise despite his lack of armor and growing injuries. He was fighting with a fluid grace that had been absent for weeks, as though the immediate danger had burned away the fog of his delusions, leaving only the warrior behind. The harpy circled and dove again and again, each time met by Elara's blade, though each exchange left him with new cuts and gashes. Blood streamed from a dozen minor wounds, yet he refused to yield his position at the tunnel mouth. Doreen, standing further back in the tunnel, nocked an arrow with steady hands. Unlike her companions, she saw the battlefield with crystal clarity. She tracked the harpy's movement, waiting for the perfect moment as it banked low for another dive at Elara. She loosed her arrow, and the shaft buried itself deep in the creature's shoulder joint, where wing met body. The harpy screeched in pain and veered away, its flight pattern now erratic and labored. It circled once more, trailing black blood behind it, then retreated toward the lighthouse tower. As silence fell, broken only by their ragged breathing and the distant crash of waves, horror dawned on their faces. The adrenaline of battle faded, and reality crashed down upon them. Morthal was gone.
Balin!
Zira cried suddenly, remembering the dwarf who had been standing at the cliff's edge. They rushed out, scanning the rocky path, but found only scattered debris where Balin had stood moments before.
They're gone. The sea is hungry,
Elara said simply, his voice hollow.
No!
Zira shook her head, refusing to accept it.
No, they could have survived. The sea.
Not in that storm. Not in that sea.
Doreen cut in, her voice matter-of-fact, as she surveyed the churning waters below. Despite the lingering threat of harpies, they made their way down to the shoreline, following a narrow path that zigzagged down the cliff face. They called for Morthal and Balin until their voices grew hoarse, even searching for the strange crab they'd encountered earlier, hoping it might help search the waters. But no answer came. When they finally climbed back up toward the stone bridge, arrows suddenly whistled through the air, splintering against rocks mere inches from their heads. Someone, or something, was firing at them from the lighthouse windows above.
Get down!
Doreen hissed, diving behind a boulder as another volley of arrows rained down. Zira scrambled for cover, her back pressed against a rocky outcropping. Elara slid in beside her, blood still seeping from the harpy wounds on his shoulder.
We need to move,
he said quietly, eyes calculating distances to safer positions.
On 3, run for those rocks.
They darted between sheltered positions, arrows pursuing them until they reached a deep recess in the cliff face, temporarily safe from the lighthouse's line of sight. It was there, in the relative safety of the rocks, that the full weight of their loss finally hit Zira. Hot tears spilled down her cheeks, silent at first, then giving way to deep, racking sobs. Morthal, rigid, preachy, infuriating Morthal, was gone. The man who had seen her scales and still treated her wounds. The man who had promised to help Ilara. Doreen watched Zira cry with detached curiosity. Then, with a muttered curse, she stood.
His sword,
She said.
I'm getting it.
Are you mad?
Zira gasped.
They're still shooting.
Doreen merely shrugged.
Good steel shouldn't go to waste.
Despite the arrows that whistled through the air, she darted out, timing her sprint between volleys to retrieve Morthal's fallen blade from the stone bridge. It was a calculated risk, one she deemed worth taking for the value of the weapon. Ilara watched her go without comment. He had told Morthal days ago that he could no longer protect him, that his duty was to Eli alone. Now fate had made good on his words. There was no point in sorrow or regret. This was simply another step along life's path. Hours passed. Zira and Ilara returned to the shoreline, scanning the churning waters for any sign of either man. Doreen was keeping watch higher in the cliffs. The sky darkened as evening approached, the storm gradually subsiding. Then Zira spotted something in the water, a shape bobbing among the waves.
There!
She cried, pointing.
Look! He's swimming! Morthal's swimming to shore!
She ran toward the water's edge, joy surging within her, calling to the others. But as she drew closer, the awful truth revealed itself. Morthal wasn't swimming. His body was simply being carried by the tide, face down, arms spread wide as if in a final embrace with the sea.
No!
Zira whispered.
No! No! No!
The others arrived beside her, staring in stunned silence as the waves gently deposited Morthal's body onto the shore. His face was peaceful, almost serene, but there was no denying the stillness of death. His armor, dented from the impact, weighed him down, and his skin had a pale, bloodless quality that no living man possessed. For several long minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the crash of waves and the distant cry of seabirds. Then Zira knelt beside Morthal, her movements slow as though underwater herself. With trembling fingers, she caressed his cold cheek. Gently, she removed the holy symbol of Helm from around his neck, and from his belt pouch, she took the medallion of Tiamat wrapped in Sildar's handkerchief. These things she had to take. Then Zira stood up and walked away from the shore without saying a word, her shoulders straight, her steps measured. She had already ran out of tears. Doreen watched her go, then turned back to Morthal's body. She shrugged, a gesture that seemed callous, but masked her own discomfort with death. With practiced hands, she began going through his belongings. She took his coin pouch, checking its weight with a small nod, then opened his backpack.
Are you hungry?
She called to the others, pulling out rations.
There's food here too.
Ilara looked nauseous, but he stepped forward anyway, bending to lift Morthal's body onto her back.
Help me,
she said quietly to Doreen. Together they carried the cleric to their wagon. His body was shockingly heavy, waterlogged, and still encased in armor. As they laid him in the back, Ilara arranged his arms across his chest, then wrapped his body in blankets and finally set Morthal's shield engraved with the symbol of Helm on top of him, giving him a dignity in death that seemed important. They would take him back to Phandalin, back to the Shrine of Luck where Sister Garael could perform proper rites. It was the least they could do for the man who had brought them together, who had believed in Helm's protection right until the end. And as the wagon began its journey away from the lighthouse, away from the sea, the green light continued to pulse from the tower, like a heartbeat continuing long after it should have stopped.
O helm, protector strong and true, grant me wisdom in all I do, to lead with strength, to guard with care, yet leave their hearts to wander where. O helm, protector strong and true, grant me wisdom in all I do, to lead with strength, to guard with care, yet leave their hearts to wander where. Per tenebras ubivia manet, servare possim non imponet, solum liberi verum amant, lux sacra corda aperit sancta. In trials dark where choices wait, let me protect but not dictate, for only free can hearts embrace the truth that shines in sacred grace. O helm, I ask for strength to lead, to guard with love yet not impede, for only free their hearts may find thy truth, O helm, with open mind. Per tenebras ubivia manet, servare possim non imponet, solum liberi verum amant, lux sacra corda aperit sancta. O helm, I ask for strength to lead, to guard with love yet not impede, for only free their hearts may find thy truth, O helm, with open mind.